copy of my book, I'm actually fine. I really am. I believe in the message. I want more people to be able to apply the principles in their life just because I think they'll be more healthy. I need this message every day. And so sometimes success is not about the size of the platform. Success is one life at a time. And I really do try to remind myself of that because it can be easy to get head faked. But like the impact that it had on me was, I hope that tens of thousands of people will read this book. I really do.
Hey, Tim, how are
Hey,
you?
doing good. How are you doing?
I'm doing real good. Thanks so much for joining me.
Absolutely.
I really enjoyed your book. I've been thinking about my life and thinking about how I redefine success, how I think about success, and all the usual things. And yeah, I ended up picking up your book and reading it and really enjoyed it. And then I didn't even realize, but you were Donald Miller's right-hand man. So, I mean, I know Donald Miller, but I didn't know you, which is kind of a very appropriate theme for the book, isn't
Yeah.
it? Like the people who are driving things forward are not always in the spotlight, right?
That's exactly it. It's such
That's
a
really cool.
strange thing where you like write this book and then all of a sudden you just realize nobody has any idea who I am. And it's such a weird thing where now you almost have to like go out there and like talk about all the work that you've done while at the
Yeah.
same time I was just kind of comfortable just hanging out back here behind the scenes.
Do you feel more comfortable behind the scenes? I mean, everybody likes the spotlight, of course. We all want attention, but where are you most comfortable?
Definitely more in the background, but I've also learned I love being out in front of people, and I had never really had a reason to do keynotes and to be a guest on podcasts and those kinds of things. But the book kind of launched me into it, and I found it's been great. I feel very comfortable having conversations like this because it doesn't feel, I just think the posture behind it is also what makes it work. It's like, look, I'm here to try to help whoever it is that's listening to maybe think about some of what we're going to talk about in a little bit of a different way.
Yeah.
And I'm not here to tell you what to do or to try to villainize one path or the other. There is no bad person here. And I think that's one of the big messages I felt was an important one come to realize in even writing this book is spotlight's not the problem. That's not the problem. And in fact, it's what's your intent? Because actually, if you have a really big platform, there's examples in the book of the former CEO of Ford, Allan Mulally, or LeBron James, or Tim Cook. Like, these people couldn't be more in the spotlight, and yet how they show up is actually able to be used for a lot of good. And so to try to say that the spotlight's the problem is just not this, that's not it. It's just the problem that I have is when people try to say that's the only one thing that matters. It's that or nothing. And to that, I'm like, I don't know. Maybe we should talk about it a little bit more.
Let's talk about it. So I was reading the book and I'm like, I agree with what he's saying. I agree with this, and then part of me is like, oh, but I really do like success. I really do like being in the spotlight. And I think towards the end of the book, you say that it's not something that you can eliminate. It's just a tension that you've got to manage, right?
Yeah, everything that you just said around it is learning to live in the tension. This is not going away. There's not a day that you're going to wake up and say, I don't struggle with that anymore. Here's an example. So I have a really hard time posting on social media. And the reason why is because when I run it through my own filters, one of the questions that I ask myself is, am I just trying to do this to get people to think a particular way about me? Or am I actually trying to share it as a means of being helpful?
Yeah.
And more often than not, if I'm honest with myself, the reason why I'm sharing it is I want people to think a certain thing about me. And what I also realize is when I am posting, I'm checking it so often just to see what people's reaction is to it. So therefore, I end up not only posting from what is sometimes an unhealthy place, but I'm also now spending a whole bunch of time wondering how other people are thinking about me and perceiving the thing that I put out there. And when I first got Instagram, I don't know, whenever it started, what was this, like 2010 something, 2010, 2011? I look back at my early feed and I just love taking pictures and applying the filters, and I enjoyed that.
Yeah.
And it just kind of like spiraled into this whole other thing. And so I don't think that there is going to be a day that I wake up and say, I do not care what anyone thinks. I think that it is going to be an ongoing internal wrestling of checking my intent behind why it is that I do what I do. And I don't think I'm the only one either. I think that's the reality of just what life is.
The other thing, it's like there's a ratchet, right? So like today I live a life that maybe 20 years ago I would not have dreamed in my wildest imagination. Yet I'm still got new goals, bigger goals, the next thing, the next revenue level, the next goal, and all of this sort of stuff. So there was a time when I thought, wow, imagine making $10,000 a month. That was just like an unbelievable, like I will be rich then. And then I didn't realize, and then I'd passed it by a long shot and all of that sort of stuff. And then you get to the next goal and it's like a never ending cycle. And you see this in hugely wealthy people. I mean, like I was listening to a podcast with Grant Cardone yesterday, and he's a billionaire now. He's talking about getting to 10 billion. And those are inspirational as well. Like you're also thinking, hey, that's really cool to go big and all of that sort of stuff. But at the same time, I know from my own experience, it's generally not a recipe for long-term success or happiness, I've found.
I think you have to ask yourself, like, when is enough? What is success actually? And I think goals are great. I love goals. But what I've actually found is it's less about the goal and more about what that does in terms of creating focus in my life and focus in the way that I spend my time. And you're measuring your progress towards these goals. You come up against challenges and you have to solve those problems. You have to partner with people to try to achieve that goal. That's it for me. It's less about the actual goal oftentimes, and it's more about just the process of getting there.
So how do you set goals? Do you have a end of a year review and like this went well, this didn't, this is what I want more of? There was a chapter in your book where you're talking about like just focusing on the process, not necessarily on the goal. And I mean, I talk about that in some of my books and some of my material about really it's the process that's going to give you the compounding gains. It's not necessarily the big goal, which is kind of inspirational in the moment, but gone later on. But I'd love to understand, like, how do you set goals? How do you feel about that? And how do you think about that?
It's a little bit of a mix. I think you do have to set some kind of goal just to know where you're even headed. But what I've also found about goal setting is if you try today to set a goal for the end of the year, unless you're using a massive amount of data, chances are where you end up a year from now is going to be very different from where you are today, because trying to anticipate 12 months in the future is just taking a giant guess. It's so hard. Even to try to set a trajectory for where you might be 3 or 6 months from now is wildly challenging. And so I like to set a goal just as here's where we want to go, because I also think that the size of your goal can inform the strategy that you end up moving on. So if we don't even need to talk about anything specific, but if your goal is 1,000 versus 100,000, well, as you would imagine, like those are two very different strategies. And so I like setting goals just to know, like, what ballpark are we in right now? But after you've kind of determined that and you have a sense of, okay, like this is where we want to go, this is our intent, you do have to just focus on each and every day as a way to measure if you're doing a good job. The process is something that I am so much more interested in. So I think that's a luxury of being able to have more of a long-term view on success. Like this podcast, for example, you either could say, okay, well, my goal is X thousand of downloads. And if I don't get that, then I either failed, I missed my goal, what you get bummed out about it. But if I'm you, I just feel like, hey, I'm going to walk into the conversations prepared. I'm going to try to facilitate what I think is a helpful conversation, not only for what you want to learn from it, but also what you want to share with other people. You also can feel content in doing everything that you know to do on the marketing side, whether that's your social media plan, email plan, however other ways that you're distributing it. But if you've determined what you believe is a good strategy, not only on the content side, but on the marketing side, in a lot of ways, the numbers just are what they are. And so it's fine to set I want to have 10,000 downloads on this episode or whatever. But I just feel like to track your success a little bit more along the lines of, did I create a plan that I feel good about and did I go out and do it? I'm more looking at my work in that way than I am in obsessing over these certain numbers. What I found is the numbers kind of take care of themselves. I think also why I've been able to operate more in the process is because when I've followed the process, it just feels like it continues to get us where we need to go.
I totally agree with that, but I constantly have this tension with, okay, so totally agree that it's the process. Yes, totally agree that we want to set a direction and move towards it. But I'll give you an example that I typically run into with my teams. You having been the number 2 to StoryBrand, which was a very fast growing business, started from, I think you said in the book, you started when they were 250,000 in revenue, right up to 16 million. And I know they're well above that now. When you were planning, you must have had conversations with Don, with some of the other team there. Hey, we want to get to this revenue level, or we want to get to this kind of goal or whatever. Like, how did you guys set company goals and then make sure that team didn't burn out as well? Because that's a conversation I have with my team as well. I'm like, guys, this is running too slow. Let's do this in 3 months instead of 9 months or whatever. And a lot of times the pushback is, hey, look, this is going to burn out the team. This is unrealistic or whatever. And so there is that tension. So like, how did you guys solve that? And was that a big issue as growing that business, which was a pretty rapidly growing business as well?
Yeah, if we had a tendency, it was to take on a lot of work with a small team. I don't think in my 10 years, I was the first employee. So it was me, and then we built that. I was there every step of the way. Wow. And in all of that time, we never had a feeling of overstaffed. We prided ourselves in kind of the lean and mean approach, which is how you keep your profit margin really high. Yeah. But with that, you also have to realize that the challenge is you may get to that point where people are spinning way too many plates, and I kind of thrive in that environment. I kind of like it. I like taking on a lot and just figuring out a way to make it happen. I remember early on, we had a conference and we had 2,000 people at this conference. And we didn't have a customer service person on our team. We didn't have any of that. Like, when a registration would come through for the conference, I would email every single person and say, saw that you registered. And then I would be doing all the back and forth. So here I am. We had this tiny team. There's like 3 of us on staff. We were hosting a conference of 2,000 people. Wow. And then my friends who actually work in events, they're like, you pulled this off with what? And I'm like, I don't know. There's like 2 or 3 of us. Is that good? I don't know. So I think that we just kind of operated by doing a ton with few people. But yeah, you do burn some people out, and it's not for everybody. But I also think that there is a kind of person who loves it. And you have to have people who are in a stage of life that they are wanting to do the same kind of thing as you are in that. But that said, I feel like how I'm communicating all this is that we just burned everybody out all the time. And that's not true. I do think that I also, especially the way that I show up as a leader, is a very empathetic. I am understanding where everybody's at. And I would actually rather take on the work, but feel bad about putting that same kind of pressure on you. So I think we had a nice balance between trying to be realistic with deadlines, pushing back on. Don was just 100 miles an hour all the time.
Yeah.
We're always, it should have launched yesterday. And so that's just him as the visionary. But I'm like, I hear you, Don. And you need to know all of what is going on behind the scenes that we are saving you from not even having to think about or worry about. And I don't even want to try to explain it to you, but just trust me when I say it can't just be done right now. So there's also that dance of trying to figure out how much information you give to the CEO as a way of letting him know why we can't hit particular ambitious goals and deadlines. So I think that the job of a leader is to be ambitious. And, Steve Jobs used to do it all the time. I mean, I spent a little bit of time at Apple, and while I never worked in his office or anything or got to experience this firsthand, he's known for somebody who just sets these wildly ambitious goals and deadlines, and people find a way to just figure it out. And so I think that it's very normal for a visionary leader like that, who's not in the weeds, to just be like, let's do it. Why can't we get it done? And I think that invigorates people and allows them to see that maybe they're thinking or dreaming a little bit too small. And this is kind of the environment. We've dealt with it a little bit, at least in my experience.
To me, a project kind of loses energy and momentum if it goes too slow. If you've been working on something that really should have been done 3 months ago, 6 months ago, or whatever, it's just like it becomes a drag. Like it doesn't, loses momentum, loses energy, all of those sorts of things. So to me, that's always a tension I'm having with some of my leadership team. It's like, yes, this should have been launched yesterday, exactly as you were saying. Yes, this should be faster. And
so you're normal is basically like this is, but I bet if you talk to a dozen people that are in similar positions to yours and mine, like I bet they are experiencing the exact same thing. I think there is always going to be that tension that people are operating with.
So I'd love to understand, like let's say StoryBrand, when you were at 1 million or 2 million in revenue, did you set goals that were like kind of quote mark realistic goals? Like, okay, we're going to go from 2 to 2.5, or did you like say, all right, we're going from 2 to 10 kind of thing? Were they kind of big, ambitious goals, or were they like, hey, we're just going to keep increasing by 20% a year or 30% or whatever, that sort of thing? Like, how did you think about goal setting from that perspective?
Early on, we just started doubling revenue every year, like multiple years in a row.
Was that due to demand, or was that due to just really good marketing, or like what did you put that down to?
So when I first started with Don, it was just he and I, and the $250,000 in revenue was really from him. He wrote books, he did keynotes, and then we had these conferences, which were making some money, but not like a crazy amount of money. So some of it was transitioning from, at the time, he was writing Christian memoirs to business books. So I started in 2012, and I believe StoryBrand we started doing our first workshops in 2015. And so 2015 to 2016, part of the growth was us transitioning from this guy writing books, doing keynotes, to creating products, and him going out and doing these workshops, and us then hosting public workshops as well. So a lot of it was product creation and rolling out some of that for the very first time. And there was an appetite for it. And then we ended up creating an online course and started teaching people not only in now a workshop, but also online, on demand. And that was pretty novel at the time. There weren't a whole lot of people, I feel like, that were really doing that kind of stuff back when we started. And now everyone's got an online course.
I'm assuming the book StoryBrand lit a fire on the growth of the business. I mean, that book did very well. And was the business prior to the book?
The book was last.
Oh, really?
So the first was workshops. I want to say we were selling them for $2,000 a person for like a 2-day marketing workshop. And that was 10 to 15 people around a boardroom. And then they grew to 25, then they grew to 40. And then eventually we were 150 to 200 people at these workshops. And so we tried doing them quarterly. We tried doing them more like monthly, to where we'd have around 10 a year. So we were very consistent with the workshops and really started spreading and validating the idea and learning the best way to communicate all of that through the live workshop setting, while Don was also doing private workshops with one company. And then we've turned it into an online course. And that was, I believe, the workshops went from like $2,000 for a 2-day event to $3,000. And then when we started selling the online course, now you can get it on demand for $1,500. And then the book came out in 2017. So it was a couple of years of
So the book was fairly
just
late
workshops.
to the piece. It wasn't necessarily the driver, was it?
No, the book now has been a driver for certification. So now people can become StoryBrand certified. So if you're a marketing agency and you want to be able to use that intellectual property in your marketing and consulting, people can become certified. And so I feel like the book really not only drove demand for people just applying those StoryBrand principles to their own marketing at their business, but also then it's driven the demand for needing people to help do all of that work. And so now all of a sudden the certified community has been one of the big growth opportunities, and those people then can be the ones doing the website or the lead generator or the whatever comes as a result.
We've had quite a lot of StoryBrand people also go through our certification. They're pretty complimentary as well, the one-page marketing plan certification. So prior to the book, how did you get bums on seats? How did you fill 100 rooms, 15 people, then 20, then 30, then 50, then 100? I mean, at $2,000 or $3,000 a person.
It's so hard, right? It's
Yeah,
crazy.
Course, yeah.
It's so fun to talk about now, but it was not easy.
I can imagine.
I think one of the advantages was Don had a pretty big following early on, just because of him doing his book writing.
Yeah.
So he had started to build an email list. We did not hire a director of marketing until like 3 years into the StoryBrand portion of the company, because email marketing was our director of marketing. Everything we did was through email.
I agree. But email just a workhorse. And so did you find that the audience from his kind of Christian books translated to StoryBrand, or was that completely two separate audiences?
A little bit of both. There's a lot of people who were there for the Christian memoirs that weren't there for the business books. They're like, where'd the old Don go? And he's like, I'm writing business books now. So it kind of lost some of those people, which is fine. But there were some of those same people who were buying Blue Like Jazz that worked in marketing. Actually, the first ever time that Don presented the StoryBrand framework to somebody, we were in Cincinnati, and somebody from P&G wanted us to go present this content at a kind of like an internal meeting. And like the chief marketing officer is there, and I can't even remember who else was in the room, but there was like 40 people there. And these are some of the top people in that business on the marketing side. So the person who ended up inviting us in, it's so funny because here they are in marketing, and it's almost like before we leave, they like pull us aside and it's like, I really like Blue Like Jazz. Thanks for coming. So it's like this closet Don Miller, like Christian author fan who now works in marketing, and that got us in the door in a lot of different places. So it's like, yes, it's both. We did lose some people, but also it gave us a lot of built-in trust and credibility in a group of people who were faith-based that also were in business.
Yeah. I feel like now it seems obvious, but it's pretty forward thinking of Don to have built an audience at that time. Like now building an audience is really the superpower. You see a lot of people building a big audience and then monetizing it or launching a product or a service or something like that. It really is a superpower to have an audience and then find what they need, rather than completely backwards, where a lot of people start with a product or a service or whatever and then try and find an audience to sell to.
What's interesting though about that is Don, for the number of books that he had sold. When we started working together, the number of email addresses that we had was dismal.
Really?
And because that wasn't what being an author was in 2010 or whatever. Like, there just weren't a bunch of people who were selling a bunch of books and then also really trying to drive email addresses.
Yeah.
And so we were learning from people like Michael Hyatt, who was actually trying to convert blog readers into email addresses, into book buyers. Michael was doing stuff like that. And so I feel like we were learning from friends and just kind of taking some of their best practices and applying it to ours. But that's something that was a very intentional thing to start to do, to catch up on. But yeah, there's a very long time when the number of book readers to email addresses, there was a big discrepancy in those two things.
What were your biggest learnings? I mean, not necessarily just in StoryBrand, but I mean, you've played that role, that person behind the scenes who's really grown a business or driven projects forward. What have you been your biggest learnings? Because no doubt, and I'm not saying Don is like that, but no doubt you work with some big egos and people who continually pushing, want to get to the next level, and it's your responsibility, or at least you've taken on the responsibility to be that person who really implements the vision. I mean, if to use attraction terminology, you're the integrator, right? So there's the visionary and the integrator. What have been your biggest learnings in those kind of roles?
It's so important to be the integrator alongside a visionary that you want to be around and that you enjoy working with.
Yeah.
Because I was less interested in the project itself. I was just up for whatever. I was having fun just building a business and being in community with the people that we started to hire and were showing up at the office every day. That was fun. The what I was less interested in. So even if you asked me today, Tim, do you have this intense desire for marketing? Like, you grew this big marketing company, you must love marketing. I'm like, I don't really care about marketing that much. It's interesting, but what I had so much fun doing was growing a business. And what's great is I felt like it was a business that was positioned to help other people be successful. So one of the big paradigm shifts in StoryBrand is your customer is the hero. You are the guide, right? Like, this is not about you. It's about your customer. And so what I had was a decade where I learned and oriented our entire team around, guys, this is not about us. This is actually about our customer. Let's obsess about their problems and trying to solve their problems. So I actually looked at my work in the exact same way. Dawn is my customer. And I'm like, hey, what do you want to get done? What vision do you have? I'm like, oh, that sounds so fun. I think I can help. Let me go do that. That's it. Like, I am fulfilling my purpose in life when I get to leverage my weird skill set of being able to be in the high-level strategy meeting, but then can dig really deep into the weeds. And I love being in the weeds to go help execute. I have a very strange skill set in that. And so I come alive when I spend time with a visionary, helping them get something done in the world. That's very fulfilling for me. And I got to do that times about 1 million, whatever the project was.
That's so cool. I mean, no doubt in working for a decade in the same business and in a high growth business, how did you settle, I guess, I don't know, for one or another word, disagreements around direction or growth or a particular strategy or whatever? Hey, I think we should do this. And the visionary is, no, look, we've got to go in this direction. And so you both got a high level of conviction. Is it just like, hey, highest rank says where we go? Or like, what was your approach and how did you guys settle that?
You know, I've really learned so much about how to do this in the last couple of years. So I transitioned out of StoryBrand to launch into a new dream. I wrote a book. I thought I was going to be writing and speaking and that be this kind of new career for me, a bit of an unexpected one, but I was just going for it. And 6 months into that, I get asked to be the CEO of a nonprofit. And the guy who asked me to lead this nonprofit is a guy named David Novak. And David was the CEO of Yum Brands, which is KFC, Taco Bell, and Pizza Hut. So he grew that business from $4 billion to 32 billion in market cap. But what I love so much about David's approach to leadership is the way that he did it. The number one behavior that he drove in the business at Yum was recognition, valuing every person's contribution. And so David actually wrote this book. It's one of my favorite business books and just books in general, but it's called Taking People With You, the only way to make big things happen. So David's whole leadership philosophy. So here's a guy who had 1.5 million employees across the globe. Okay. So David says, if you want to make anything big happen, you got to take people with you. So David, I've learned so much from him on this front. And what David says is, if you take the joy of the decision away from somebody, you take the joy of the job away. Take the joy of the decision away, you take the joy of the job away. So I don't think that it's effective to come in and throw down your CEO trump card. Like it might get you what you want, but I think if you're looking at how do you really build a community, a team of people who will do anything for you, you're not going to get there by engaging in decision-making like that. And what I'm grateful for is when we were at StoryBrand, we were collaborative, but I think that with David, it's kind of a whole other level where he'll come to me and say, hey, Tim, here's something that I just want you to be thinking about. It's your call, but if I were to give you any coaching, it would be X. So he lets me make decisions and he lets me be wrong sometimes. And then you learn. I just have an approach now that I've been able to steal from somebody who's led a business at the absolute highest level, and I think it's a good one.
I like this idea of let the person be, like I heard this from another very successful person he's the CEO of a public company, and he's like, look, there are times when I'm speaking to my CEO and I know he's heading in the right direction, and I don't use that kind of CEO, that trump card, unless I know it's going to kill the business, right? So I let them be wrong. I let them make a mistake, because otherwise they'll come back to me and say, see, we didn't make next quarter's numbers because we followed your direction or that sort of thing. So allowing your leadership team to be wrong, even when you can see they're heading in the wrong direction. I've heard that multiple times from many high-level leaders and chairmen and CEOs.
Yeah, and I do think that you bring up a really important point, which is you have to understand the stakes here. If you're the CEO of a public company, I'm sure David operates with me, and me being the CEO of his nonprofit, I think he interacts with me a little differently than if I was the CEO of Taco Bell, right?
Yeah.
So you got to also acknowledge where you are. But if I had to guess, I would actually say that David was probably doing a version of that his entire career. And when you're the CEO of a giant company like that, you can't make every decision. So the way that you teach decision making is sometimes by empowering people to fail and then learn from it.
You talk a lot about company culture and building a team, and to me that's the most difficult part of business. I mean, a lot of the stuff that we need to do to make business successful, the marketing, the sales, all of that, there are pretty well proven paths to success there. The people element, to me at least, feels most random. And it's probably because I'm a geek. I'm probably more comfortable with machine than man. I love writing. I love technology. I love being alone. I'm an introvert for sure. And to me, a lot of times I feel like I'm an alien, and I'm trying to figure out, how do these humans operate? Like, what is it that makes them tick? And so to me, that's the most challenging element. And I'm very envious of people like you who seem to just do it naturally, who can lead a team and who can do that really at a high level. And so that's part of why I wanted to connect with you, because you've clearly done that and you're doing that. And I think there's a lot I can learn from people like yourself. What don't I know? What is it that people like myself maybe don't understand or need to learn at a high level, or whatever? I just want to get some of your wisdom and magic.
Yeah, well, it's funny that you say that, because when you were saying like this is the hardest part the whole time I'm thinking, I actually think that's the easy part. The hard part is everything else that you're talking about. So that is a perfect way to tee up this idea of you have to staff your liabilities. If you know that about yourself, acknowledge that is not where you are the strongest.
Yeah.
But also, if you acknowledge that is an important part of building a healthy team and culture, then go find somebody who can do that.
Yeah.
And the reality is we all have different wirings, and it's for a reason. A basketball team needs a point guard who can dribble really well, and they need a big man. And you're not trying to have the point guard the 7-footer. It's just we have different strengths. We have different DNA, and I think Patrick Lencioni has done some incredible work on this front with his latest book, The Working Genius.
Okay.
And it's a $25 assessment, but he's broken down kind of these 6, what he would call it, your genius. And that you take this assessment and it calls out your 2 strongest. And you're only a genius at 2 of the 6. But what's been really interesting to see is how everyone interacts within a team, given the fact that is their genius. And so I just love this book. By the way, I could talk a lot of time about just this concept, but they break down the different personality types from the highest level all the way down more towards like ground level. So it's wonder, invention, discernment, galvanize, enablement, and tenacity. So it's like there's people who have the genius of wonder, who sit around and wonder, like, what if we, whatever. But then you have the other person who's all the way on the other end of the spectrum, which is tenacity. And that's going to be your administrative assistant. That's just like, cool, why don't you think about that and decide? And then I'm going to go get to work and execute the thing that you're dreaming about. And so I think that the reality is we all just need to understand we have different strengths, and it's most important for us to staff our liabilities. And to build a winning team, you have to staff all of the different areas of a business that really needs to be staffed.
I 100% agree with that. I often say staff your weaknesses and double down on your strength, because you can make your weaknesses slightly less weak by putting a lot of time and effort, and sometimes you should, but a lot of times you'll get far more return for your time, money, effort by just doubling down on your strengths and staffing your weaknesses. That's something that I firmly believe in. Switching gears a little bit, so I always have a high amount of respect for anyone who's gone through the unreasonable pain and time and effort of publishing a book, right? I mean, first of all, congratulations. That's huge. I mean, how many people say they want to write a book one day? It's on their bucket list and, of course, never do. So huge accomplishment and huge props to you. And also, you've been around a lot of books and authors, and Donald Miller, I mean, I don't know how he does it. He's probably, what is he, got 10 books now or something like that? I just can't fathom how someone pumps out 10 books, right? I'm exhausted at 2.
I'm exhausted at 1.
So you've seen book launches, you've seen all of that. Like, what makes the book successful? Like, there are some books that just pop off, and there are some books that just, and I mean, I know we're using a measure of success as in book sales and reviews and all of that, but there are books that kind of just get traction and books that don't. What has been your observation, and is it intrinsic in the book? Is it the writing? Is it the superficial stuff like the title, the cover? Like, what makes a book really work versus not?
Going to the first part where you're talking about how challenging it is to write a book, the only difference between somebody who's written a book and somebody who hasn't is the person who wrote the book just didn't stop. They didn't quit because it just takes a crazy amount of perseverance and persistence to just, Don always used to say, put a little something on the plot every day. And I had a mantra that I would say almost every day. It's like, I will add a small amount to my book each and every day. Like I will, and a small amount could be a sentence. It could be me listening to a podcast interview for research. It was just add something to my book each and every day. So the thing that I believe about what makes a book sell is I think that everyone, this is true for any content. We're just so consumed with content I don't think people are interested in passionless. I just finished because I needed to check a box. Like I think people can feel it when you believe in what it is that you're talking about, when you believe that if somebody were to read this book, that their life would be impacted by it. And I actually got some help when I was writing my book. I didn't write every single word, which is actually kind of perfect for the theme of the book. Like there were two people behind the scenes helping me write the book that will never get the credit that they deserve for the contribution that they made to the book, even though I tried so hard to give them that credit. But I really wanted, even as I was trying to help find people to join the project, I don't want somebody who is just going to do it. I wanted you to believe in the message and want to put that little extra something into it. And so I just think people can feel it. I think they can feel it. Why do some sell a crazy amount? Like, I don't know. If I knew that answer, if you know that answer, publishers would be calling us and we'd be making a lot of money for this secret little bit of magic. But I do think it is an alignment of the felt need that is happening in society or in a particular niche or industry, and for it to be done in a really well executed product.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's a product. Like a lot of authors feel like, hey, I've done my magic and, the rest is up to the world. Whereas it is a product. And I do think about a book at least the books I write as in, hey, this is a 10-year project. This is not just the writing and the launch. This is, okay, the marketing, the concept, all of the things that are going to come after it. And my wife is a big fiction reader, and some of these fiction authors, they're pumping out 5-6 books a year. Like it's just like incredible. And I don't know if it's just a divide between fiction and non-fiction, but even like, for example, like my friend Mike McAllowitz, he's doing a new book every year, and he pumps out books faster than I can read them. And I think that's incredible. I asked him about that. He said, well, actually, I spent 5 years on the book. I'm working on 5 at a time kind of thing. So that was an interesting.
I love that guy.
Yeah, he's cool. Mike is a legend. But even him, he's got like a couple of breakout hits like Profit First. And I've been thinking deeply about this because the conclusion I came to is that it's the big idea or the concept behind the book. Like you think about like books that have done amazingly well, like, hey, there can be a 4-hour work week, or there's a blue ocean strategy, or hey, you can have a marketing plan on one page, or basically a big idea behind the purple cow. So
you can join the secret society of success.
The secret society of success. Exactly. So like a big idea behind the book to me, and then communicating that big idea in the title and subtitle. There is a big mystery element to why some books do so well and why some don't. But in the time I've spent kind of researching it, I'm like, it's not the writing, because I know there are some books that have awful writing. They're just a mess in terms of writing, but they've done extremely well because the concept is strong. The big idea behind it is strong. And then there are books that are beautifully written that haven't done very well just because the concept is not super, super strong. So I don't know. That's the conclusion I've come to. I don't know. It could be right, it could be wrong, but that's where I've gotten to.
Our brains really do like linear. And I saw the success of StoryBrand. It's a 7-part framework. It's a formula.
Yeah.
It makes your marketing easy, very clearly defined problem.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot going for it. The Secret Society of Success was a more challenging book to write because as hard as I tried, I didn't feel like it was true to the content to give you a formula. Because one of the big problems that I talk about early in the book is the spotlight mindset, this unhealthy desire for attention and recognition. It's that thing that has us wanting to be in the spotlight or to get the credit. And no matter how hard I tried, I don't think that I can give you 3 steps that will completely solve your problem.
You do put together a framework, though. You talk about getting lost in the work. You talk about...
I mean, there's like these tactics, but I'm more handing you tools when you kind of trip up on some of these different things. But, what sells in marketing is you were overweight and now you are not. Just do this thing. So it's like this is maybe a little bit messier of a concept. It takes a minute to get it, to really, I feel like you can understand what I'm trying to say in the book around this need to redefine success. But I think that you really appreciate it when you really get into it and you read a couple chapters and you're like, I feel that. Like my soul feels that. And so I also think that's a part of it as well, is some books are going to just, it's like pop music, right? Like you're just going to appreciate it. But there's some that's a little bit more of an acquired taste, and it might be a smaller but niche audience. But here's the thing that I also think is really important as you're trying to measure success on a product, a book, or a whatever. So there is one scoreboard that I could look at if I were to try to determine the, quote, success of the book, and that is book sales, okay? But I also think that it is important to be thinking about some of these other ways to measure success. And I got a text message one day from a friend of a friend. He had been fired as a head basketball coach at a Division I basketball school and ended up going to be an assistant coach at another university, and somebody sent him my book. And here he was, just completely lost, feeling very deflated and like a failure after this very public firing that he had as this head basketball coach. So after going through like a year of kind of just starting to figure out his life a little bit, there's a lot of other things going on along that journey in addition to him reading the book, but he gets a job at a new school, and on the whiteboard in his office, the last day that he's in his office, he writes down quotes from my book, all the different things that had helped him on his journey kind of recover from this negative headspace of being fired. Because the person who is coming in to take his job had also been fired as a former head men's basketball coach.
Oh, wow.
So I'm like getting chills even thinking about it. I hope I'm explaining this clearly, but like the impact that it had on me was, I hope that tens of thousands of people will read this book. I really do. If it was able to help Michael through whatever situation that he's in, and now me and Michael text like quite often just because it's like a new friend. There's this bond that he and I share.
Totally.
And if I don't sell another copy of my book, I'm actually fine. I really am. I believe in the message. I want more people to be able to apply the principles in their life just because I think they'll be more healthy. I need this message every day. And so sometimes success is not about the size of the platform. Success is one life at a time. And I really do try to remind myself of that because it can be easy to get head faked.
I love that. And I'm sure you will sell a lot more copies. It's a book that I really enjoyed. I got a lot out of it. I got a lot of similar vibes from reading your book as I did Clayton Christian's How Will You Measure Your Life? I mean, there was definitely...
I haven't read that.
It's a really good, it's a really good book. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. I thought that was a really good book, but he kind of forms a lot of the similar conclusions to you, that it's a lot of the success, a lot of the ways that you'll kind of look back on your life are not the things that you're striving for every single day. So really good book. So yeah, I'm on my journey to kind of, it sounds a little bit cringe, I think, but kind of figuring out what success is and what to prioritize each day and how to think about goals and all of those sorts of things. I'm thinking that through every single day, and I really appreciate your book and your work. And it's helped me in the journey.
Well, it makes me so happy. And I love that you even just reached out after having read it and wanted to have this conversation. And all of us, I think we're trying to figure out what success is. And if there's been a North Star for me as I was writing this book, a quote by a guy named Albert Schweitzer that I love. And he says, "I don't know what your destiny will be. Some of you will perhaps occupy remarkable positions. Perhaps some of you will become famous by your pens or as artists. But I know one thing. The only ones among you who will be really happy are those who have sought and found how to serve."
I love that.
And if there is a big idea that I live by, it's that. It's like, if I try to help other people win, I think I'm going to be fine. And so that's the way the secret society is: help other people win.
I love that. That's so good. I once heard Brian Tracy say that the Latin word for the word deserve comes from service, right? We think of deserve as something that's owed to you or whatever, but he said it comes from service. So I love that. Thank you so much, Tim. I appreciate your time. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, and thank you for putting this book together. I think it's a valuable message and something that a lot of people should hear and read. So the book is The Secret Society of Success. I already want to be part of that society even before I read the book. Who doesn't want to be part of a secret society? So well done, Tim. Thanks so much. I really appreciate your time.
Appreciate you having me. Thanks so much.